So we're in an interesting time in U.S. politics because at the same time that Biden's approval rating keeps plummeting more and more and more. In fact, I'll have a story on that in a little bit. He's at a new historic low. At the same time that that's happening, a generic Democrat is now beating the Republicans in every midterm poll. So this is not sure I've ever seen anything like this. This is astonishing. So David Pakman has a segment on it here. Let's take a look and then we'll
There's been a dramatic turn of events in 2022 polling over the last couple of months. And I don't want to overstate this, but I also don't want to ignore this story because when 3-4 months ago, I was saying, guys, listen, everyone must vote and we have to do everything, fight for every seat, all of these things. But it's not looking great for Democrats in 2022. I think Democrats will lose the House. I think Democrats will lose the Senate. Some of you wrote to me and said, David, why are you writing it off? You should just say we can win it. I was like, well, I'm not writing it off. I'm just telling you what the polling is and I'm being realistic. The polling has reversed dramatically and Democrats are now ahead of Republicans in 3 recent polls looking at a generic 2022 ballot. A generic 2022 ballot means regardless of where you are, do you plan to vote for the Democrat or for the Republican? This is not normal, okay? And again...
So Republicans were up massively. Very recently. They were up huge. It was looking like perhaps a bigger wave than even the 2010 Tea Party wave. But now there's been a reversal. And now Democrats are up. So he's going to give the specific numbers and we'll talk about it more.
Now, there's the risk of another unintended consequence of mentioning this, which is if I say, oh, Democrats are doing great now, then people will say, well, I don't need to vote.
Yeah, I mean, look, he's saying this is the response he gets from his audience where they'll nitpick over, hey, don't do this because that'll happen. Don't do that because this will happen. But as he knows, your job is to just give the news. So you can't worry so much about the outcome. You have to give the facts, give the information, give the news and your interpretation of it, and then you move on. And you can't. It's not going to be David Pakman's fault, whatever happens in the midterm. So he's swatting aside these criticisms as he should, because they're silly criticisms. I mean, he's doing what his job is. So it's amazing that anybody would levy those criticisms. But I guess he's familiar with it because he probably reads everything that comes in. And so he feels the need to address it. But if I was him, I wouldn't even bother addressing it.
I don't quite frankly think this show is big enough to have that much of an effect one way or the other. But
although this clip did get 317,000 views. Good googly moogly, David. Those are some big boy numbers right there. Blowing me out of the water, that's for damn sure.
All must vote, but we should understand the numbers. 3 new polls. In a new Marist poll, in a congressional ballot, Democrats 48, Republicans 41. That's
48 to 41. 7-point lead for Democrats. Now understand something. Because of the gerrymandering, in order to just break even, they're going to need to win by like 5 points. So 7 isn't really a 7-point lead. It's more of like a 2-point lead. But the fact that there's any actual lead when factoring in the disadvantage they have is something.
Say +7 for Democrats. That's a big, big deal. In a new Politico Morning Consult poll, Democrats 45, Republicans 42. That's
okay. 42 to 45. See, that's more like tied or even Republicans up a little bit when you factor in that Democrats need to win by like 7 to actually pick up anything at all.
+3 for Democrats. And then in a new Yahoo News YouGov poll, Democrats 45, Republicans 38.
Okay. So again, that's like a tiny, when factoring in the bias, that's a tiny lead for Democrats, but it's still a lead.
That's +7 for Democrats. Why
really
are
like
these numbers
+2
such a big deal? There's 2 reasons. Number one, this is not typically what you see when one party has taken the White House in the previous election. In 2020, Democrats took the White House from Republicans. Biden beat Trump. You all know that. And typically, almost always, with like 3 exceptions, when that happens, you would expect Republicans to do really well in the first midterms, which would be 4.5 months from now in November. So number one,
by the way, he's right about that, but it's also a little bit of a fatalistic analysis in the sense that people view it as inevitable. Like, oh, this seesaw back and forth is always going to happen. Well, it only really happens in this modern era of politics where neither party is serving the people. If you have a political party that gets elected and then delivers on promises and serves the people and materially improves their lives and does things that people like, then you would have them pick up seats in the next election. Like, the public is a lot more rational than anybody gives them credit for. Now, I don't think people are well educated and well versed on historical knowledge and facts, but I do think they aren't masochistic. Like, they want a government that works for them. And so if the government works for them, then they reward the people who did the right thing. And that's why we always go back to FDR, but he's a great example. I mean, this dude got elected 4 times. They came up with term limits because Republicans thought we're never going to beat these guys. They're too good. He won 4 times. There was a time when he had like 80% of the House of Representatives and 80% of the Senate. It didn't get that way because of random chance. It got that way because he delivered for people. And so if you deliver, then you can win. All right, anyway, let's continue.
The fact that the numbers differ from that traditional historical reality is a really big deal. But the second reason that it's a really big deal is this is not the way the numbers looked just 3 months ago. And I think that we can all sort of take a cynical approach here and say, this is temporary. It'll go back to Republicans crushing Democrats by November. Well,
that's possible. That's definitely possible.
It's not obvious to me. But one of the things we've been talking about now for about 2 months is, are there unique circumstances in this election that make it potentially okay for Democrats when Republicans should be winning? And I say that the answer is yes. This is not a guarantee of anything. I'm still getting lots of people on Twitter saying, David, you loser. Some of them say worse things than that. Republicans are going to crush Democrats in November. Just wait and see. Well, maybe. But there are some different circumstances here. First of all, normally when we say, oh, Democrats can win by running on abortion rights. No, historically, that's not a good issue for Democrats to run on. It's not a winning issue. It's not a voting issue for Democrats. It's
True.
The type of issue that will motivate Republicans to come out to vote against a pro-choice candidate.
The evangelical base, yes.
Typically, that's the way it is. This time around, it looks like it could be different.
Yep.
Americans are more in favor of abortion being legal in most cases than at any time over the last 50 years. So public opinion is different now than it has been on abortion.
And only 13% of people want abortion banned in all cases. And Mike Pence is floating the idea of a national abortion ban. That is deeply unpopular.
And in addition to that, Trump nominated Supreme Court justices have overturned Roe v. Wade, something which 2/3 of Americans are in disagreement with. That is different. And that means in this election, that situation could make it better for Democrats, particularly if they say, we're the ones trying to keep these rights, whether it's credible or not, that's what Democrats are going to do. Secondly, normally running on gun safety regulation is a losing issue for Democrats. We've talked about it before. We've talked about it with a number of political strategists. When Democrats make gun safety regulations a big part of their campaign, it doesn't really motivate Democrats to come out and vote for them, but it does motivate Republicans to come out and vote against them. However, the rash of school and other mass shootings in the United States over the last 3 months, and just tragic numbers, hundreds of mass shootings in the United States in 2022 so far, seem to have tired out and exhausted many Americans about the Republican Party's unwillingness to consider serious gun safety regulations.
I would agree with this part of his analysis too, but the problem is I think that issue has now been neutralized and taken off the table because Biden did sign the bipartisan Senate deal on guns. It was incredibly weak, but it was something. And he'd rather take credit for that thing than continue to run on the issue and ask for more when they feel like, hey, we already got whatever we're going to get out of this issue. So I would agree with that analysis, but the Democrats themselves have neutralized it by getting that bipartisan deal through, which admittedly was a very weak deal, but they're going to say, hey, look, we did something and it was historic.
And so you have a situation where in this particular midterm, it might actually work for Democrats to run on gun safety and on abortion rights. So that's different than normal. The other element that is different than normal in these midterms is that we are coming up against the tail end of the 6-year Trumpian cycle. And I'll explain to you what I mean by that. Normally, you have a sort of relatively similar electorate throughout 3 elections. So like if you look at, 2000, 2002, and 2004 as an example, the electorate, George W. Bush won the presidency in 2000, and then you had the 2002 midterms, and Bush won re-election in 2004. There was no major change to the electorate in the year 2000, which then had to sort of sort itself out in 2002 and in 2004. It was a very similar electorate, okay? That is not the case right now. In 2016, you had all of these formerly non-political, non-voting people who were enamored with Trump, a lot of low information voters, a lot of extremists of different kinds, people who were clueless. These people were not participating in politics before 2016. They appeared in 2016. And then in 2018, some of them voted in the midterms. And then in 2020, they were still around and trying to get Trump reelected. And now Trump's gone. And there's a real question as to, do these Trumpists vote in midterms where now Trump isn't even a candidate?
I think this part of the analysis, I think, is lacking because he's underestimating the extent to which voting against Biden and against Democrats is a priority for the Republican base. And again, we saw, and this is what we saw under Obama too, it became more about not Obama, not the Democrats. These guys get really riled up and angry and frothing at the mouth when Democrats have control of anything. Now, granted, Biden's not doing Dickie McGee's act with that control, right? But to the Republican base, they're very motivated by anti-politics, by like not that politics, but just very partisan, I'm with the other guys type stuff. So this is why I think this part of the analysis is lacking a little.
And Trump is less visible and so many other things are going on? Or do those people that only entered the political space thanks to Trump's presence, do they just kind of go back to whatever they were doing before? I don't know what that is, but it didn't include voting. We don't know the answer to that, but it's potentially something that will really change the makeup of the 2022 midterm electorate. So do I have a definitive answer? I don't. But when we see Republicans were winning every generic ballot 3 months ago, Democrats are now winning every generic ballot, that is a major change and potentially significant. So I'm not ready to count out Democrats in 2022, but we must vote. We must get involved in campaigns, phone banking, all of it. And we'll be doing everything we can to cover these, the important races and the midterms.
Okay. So what's my take on it? Look, it's very straightforward. It all comes down to Roe versus Wade being overturned. That's where what it all comes down to. The whole reason for the complete shift in the polls is Roe versus Wade. Is the Supreme Court overstepping, going too far, having the overwhelming majority of the American public disagree with them. The general public understanding, well, Democrats are more pro-abortion and more pro-choice than Republicans are. And so you see this shift in the generic ballot. That's all of it. That's all of it. Because look, bottom line, this is a right-wing overreach. That's what it is. What they're doing is not popular. Their position on social issues is not popular. It is popular to bitch and moan and whine about cancel culture and people being too sensitive. That is popular. It is not popular to take the 13% position of let's ban abortion in the entire country. Let's do a national abortion ban. That's not popular. It's not popular to overturn Roe versus Wade. It's not popular to come out there and say maybe we should revisit Obergefell, which is gay marriage. It's not popular to question whether or not contraception is a right or sodomy is a right. That stuff is not popular. And so this retrograde, primitive, regressive social ideology is, it's the evangelical right-wing / Federalist Society ideology. People don't like that. And now the Supreme Court is actually exercising power and doing something that people don't agree with. So you're going to have that change in the polls. Now, here's the thing. Some people would say, well, yeah, but Democrats aren't doing anything to stop it. That's absolutely true. That's factual. And we're going ballistic at Biden over that. But the fact of the matter is, I don't know how closely people follow politics to get into the nitty-gritty of that and get into the details of that. All they know is Supreme Court says Roe versus Wade is overturned. That's like a right-wing thing. I don't like that. And that's why you see the bump in the generic polls for a generic Democrat to win now. This is because people say right-wing / Republicans, anti-choice, anti-abortion, anti-Roe versus Wade. Democrats, pro-choice, pro-abortion, pro-Roe versus Wade. So that's what accounts for that shift. Now, here's what it comes down to ultimately. For the midterms, is this issue still going to be in everybody's mind at the time? Or are high gas prices, high inflation, other economic woes, the war in Ukraine, etc., or is that going to be more in everybody's mind? What will win out in that battle? Now, look, I think generally speaking, economic issues almost always override social issues. But when you go too extreme on social issues, then yeah, maybe the social issues can override the economic issues. So it's just a matter of how are people weighing that? How is the country weighing that on the day of the election? Is the Roe versus Wade being overturned thing still fresh enough in people's minds where they're going to vote based on that? Or is it going to be, my pocketbook or my wallet is getting hammered so hard that you got to just do a swing election where it doesn't just go in the other direction because Democrats haven't delivered enough for people economically? And it's an open question. My gut tells me at this point and this could change with time, but as of right now, I think we were looking at a historic walloping for the Democrats, even worse than the 2010 Tea Party wave, where the Democrats got obliterated. But now, with the Roe versus Wade being overturned, you're just going to see like a standard Republican victory. It won't be historic. It won't be more than the Tea Party wave. It'll be a Republican win, but it won't be as gigantic as it would have been if Roe versus Wade didn't get overturned. So that's my instinct. That's my gut. I'm just guessing there. It's speculation. And this could change with time because other factors will play in before we get to the election. But that's my breakdown of it.
If you want to see me and Crystal Ball interview legends like Noam Chomsky, Cornel West, and more, subscribe to Crystal, Kyle, and Friends on Substack. $5 a month gets you the video version a day early. Remember, we take 0 ad dollars for this podcast. Or you can sign up on Substack for free and get the audio version a day later. Link in the video description box below.